What's up, everybody? MileSplit Live is back. Just me today. We're presented by New Balance. The rest of the team has left me behind going to the West Coast for championship season, but we've still got plenty going on this week. NXN Nike Cross Nationals was this past week up in Portland. We have plenty to talk about coming back from that, but the team, Brian, Corey, don't worry for all you folks out there. They are coming back. They're going to be on the show. We're Skyping them in. They were on site to really take in everything that happened at NXN, so we're going to break down our most surprising performances. Ultimately, though, we got to talk about Caitlin Toohey and everything she accomplished as an individual, breaking the course record. But first, we're going to hear from her, from what she thought about that course out at Nike this weekend.
Yeah, the race went out pretty hard. I led it from the gun just like I wanted to. I think I went out in like 5:06, 5:07 through the mile. So towards the end, my legs were definitely a little tired, but I pushed through. Even though the mud kind of slowed my time down a little, it's always muddy here, so I'm pretty happy with my race.
That's ridiculous. You know, she's talking about her time being slowed down. She set a course record because of the conditions. It wasn't great. Doesn't matter for Caitlin Toohey. Still went out and ran and had an incredible performance. So, guys, let's get into it. Corey, Brian, thanks for Skyping in today.
How's it going?
Yo.
So let's get straight to it here. Caitlin Toohey, you guys were out there in person. The first time this season getting to witness Caitlin Toohey in action. Corey, what do you think?
I mean, what else can you take away other than the fact that she is the real deal and just what we expected? Obviously, she sets a course record by 12 seconds over Katie Rainsberger's former mark from about 2014, I believe. I mean, it just was phenomenal. I mean, I think was most interesting, what we were looking forward to, is seeing how London Colbreth and Caitlin Hart and all the other girls would maybe go after her, and if they could. And we did see that maybe for the first 400 meters with London and Caitlin Hart going, but they couldn't. They soon figured out that they had they did not have the stamina or the aerobic fitness to keep up with Caitlin Toohey, and that gap grew incredibly quick, so quick. I mean, and she just continued to hammer the entire race. And what was funny was that during watching her run, like, she outran the pace car.
Oh yeah, that was insane. It was incredible. Like, the car was like, okay, well, we can't follow her because it's one individual. I think they dropped back and just led the rest of the pack, and she was out there on her own, like, completely by herself, just battling through the mud and everything.
You talked to her after the race too.
Yeah, talking to her after the race, she seemed excited to win, but like it was another cakewalk, walk in the park for her.
And what was funny, I guess, in her interview after that phenomenal run, 16:44, she told Brian asked her, how'd you feel your race? And Caitlin's so humble, she doesn't really want to sort of talk about herself, so she said that the pace was brought out to 5:02. No, Caitlin, you went out in 5:02. Yeah. So, I mean, she can't, no one's really competed with her all season, and it still was the case at a national meet. So what is she to do? Like, she can't hold that against anyone else. She's the top talent in the country, and there's a reason for it. We definitely saw it during NXN.
Yeah, and one thing I think that's really interesting, I have a lot of respect for Caitlin Hart, London Colbreth, for trying to go out with Toohey. At least, putting it out there, trying to take that next step and at least contend for a win. But I think that for athletes like them, when you haven't raced a girl like Toohey the entire season or really much in their career at the cross-country level, you've been the top dog in your state, your region all season, you don't really understand how much better Toohey is than you. You're just used to winning all these meets. They're highly ranked in the national rankings. It's not like they're poor athletes, but right now this year, Caitlin Toohey truly is at another level, and I think they didn't quite comprehend how much better she was with the fact they tried to go out with her when she's opening up in 5:06, and Kelsey Camille, spoke about that in her post-race interview. She knew how good Toohey is. She's raced her enough. She went out at her pace, and we saw how well that paid off for Camille. But one thing that's developed, the story that came out today, Corey, you published it, so we really want to get your thoughts, and Brian as well, is that Foot Locker and NXN is one of the most hotly talked about debates in cross country, the qualifying process and the conflicts there. Caitlin Toohey was offered a spot at Foot Locker and she declined. Corey, fill us into the details, and we want to hear from you. Do you think that was the right decision on her part?
Yes, because she was focusing on NXN, but there's minutia to this as well. Foot Locker came back to me maybe about an hour ago and said that they never officially offered a spot or a golden ticket to any runner who didn't qualify out of the qualifying procedure. But where we were correct is the fact that the conversation is what was posed to Caitlin Toohey and her coach. Essentially, they approached Caitlin and they said, what would you think of possibly getting in at Foot Locker if we gave you a golden ticket? So they wanted her in the race, but she basically said at that point, it's too late in the process. I'm already focused on NXN. There's a lot that probably could have gone wrong for her if she did decide to change things up late in the process. But nothing officially was ever offered to her, but they were gauging the interest of whether she would be interested. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I think Foot Locker can do a lot of good if they did offer a golden ticket. But for me, and I think Brian agrees, it shouldn't have been just Caitlin Toohey. I mean, she's the best runner in the country. We want to see her go up against Claudia Lane, but there's a lot of great athletes that didn't get the opportunity to get, race a regional, and they should have been offered the same token. I don't really think that's a strong decision to make at Foot Locker if you're gauging the interest of one kid. That goes against your principles and your rules. So I don't think it's a good thing that they were doing that behind closed doors.
Right. So Brian, when you look at this, we saw this. It's interesting too that conversation happened for Toohey, but didn't seem like that happened for Brody. Is that correct?
That's what we've heard. Yeah. I mean, talking to Brody and asking him about that, if he got any offers or anything, they weren't there. It wasn't present. It seemed like it was only Caitlin Toohey that was receiving the offer from Foot Locker. The conversation, the idea of the offer from Foot Locker.
Brody has maintained all season that he would like to run in both races. He knew there was a very clear distinction between NXN and Foot Locker. NXN is about your team, and he was trying to battle to get to NXN for his team at the regional. That's why he ran that race. But there was the conflict of the schedule. The regional ran at the same time the Foot Locker regional did. He wasn't given the opportunity to race at Foot Locker Nationals or qualify. So he, out of everyone, I probably would have agreed to that incentive had he qualified, which he would have done. So I think for a guy like Brody Hasty that came in as the favorite at NXN and ultimately got beaten at the last second, I mean, he would have really wanted to redeem himself in some ways at Foot Locker Nationals, and that's sort of where there's a loss here.
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw this back with Drew Hunter. His family wanted to run at both, and they were willing to run at both regionals, but the organizations wouldn't accommodate him. And to put that in perspective, that's 100-plus miles apart. He was going to run at one race in the morning and the second race later on to qualify for both. They were unwilling to compromise there. So we certainly see some issues, and it's not just, we can't just put it all on Foot Locker to accommodate here and just put out golden tickets, but let's say in theory that there was a process to advance to Foot Locker NXN. How deep do you think that could go? Because we could go down a slippery path here in terms of the amount of athletes we're bringing in through a separate system. But if we were to offer individuals, do you guys think should just be the winner? Should we go as deep as the top 5 podium athletes? When, Corey, you posed a different qualification system early on in the year, an article you wrote on MileSplit. What are your guys' thoughts in terms of how you could potentially be able to auto-qualify as an individual to Foot Locker from NXN?
I think if somehow, you took the top 5, I think would be a reasonable amount from NXN who didn't qualify already, because obviously some of those guys who finished top 5, top 10 may have already qualified from their regions, because not every region, is in the same situation where they can't qualify. So if you take the top 5 non-qualifiers, I think that would be maybe an okay solution to figure out. But, I mean,
It comes down to depth with me, too. I mean, if you only take the top winner at each race, you don't really help the depth of field at Foot Locker Nationals. You have to go a little bit deeper, and I think 5 really works. But
I think 10's too deep.
A question that is posed, too, though, is for an athlete who sees this route opening and say they've always traditionally run Foot Locker Nationals, what if they decide to run at Nike Nationals instead, and they use that as a qualifier? So Foot Locker in itself loses a little bit too. Say Claudia Lane decided to run NXN, out of California, decided she wanted to go to NXN instead of the regional. The regional loses out there too. So it's posed on both sides. I can see it on both sides, but I do ultimately think an at-large berth or a golden ticket option is probably the best solution to have the best race possible.
Exactly. I mean, feel free to share your thoughts with us on this. It's something we will continue to discuss in the postseason as well as looking across country next year. But, we talked about the individual winner on the girls' side. The boys' side, Aiden Troutner really pulling off the big upset here. We looked at this coming in, and the heavy favorite was Brody Hasty. He was the guy who people thought was going to come in. He wasn't at Tui's level. A lot of people were looking at the contenders on the individual side, and there was going to be a much closer race. That was expected coming in. He wasn't going to run away like Tui. So we're going to get some quick thoughts here from the post-race interview that Brody did with Corey after the race.
I felt that I definitely had some things to learn from. I went out the way that I wanted to, and I kind of was up in front when I wanted to be up in front, and I was able to cover some small moves and whatnot. I think that I probably could have been a little bit more present in the final 2K probably, and maybe knowing who's where, and I really didn't get to race all that much all year, so I didn't really get to race a lot of people, so getting to see who kicks what way was hard. So it's probably being a little bit more present in that final 2K, but other than that, I felt I had a pretty good race.
And that's really interesting what Brody talked about there, because it's something that we discussed multiple times as we went throughout the season with Brody, is that lack of racing going to hurt him once he comes to Nike Cross National. He certainly is a talented athlete, that was not a question, but does that lack of repetition, does that lack of close finishes throughout the season hurt him, and he's not going to be as sharp? And it turns out maybe he wasn't able to execute his race plan as well, which he goes on to discuss a little bit more. So Corey, you were able to talk to him after the race. Still a great finish from him, that's no doubt, but for Brody, it doesn't seem like he was as sharp as maybe he wanted to be.
I mean, you can look back 2020's hindsight and say this part of my race, it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. This part of my race wasn't as good. But ultimately, you look at the time and the performance. I look at that and I think he had a great race. I mean, he didn't know much about James Mora or Danny Kilray or Aiden Troutner. He hadn't raced them. That was the issue. He didn't. Strategy certainly plays a part without having raced enough. But I think he was fit and ready to go in that race. And you look at the conditions of the course. Maybe he wasn't able to do some things that he wanted to do in terms of striking. I talked to him a little bit, and I think some of the variances was about foot strikes and how he could adequately attack this course, and it didn't really suit his style of running. On a different course, maybe that better suits him, like in Foot Locker Nationals. But ultimately, I think he made the best of what he had. He ran a really great race, and he got out-kicked at the end, and sometimes you just get beat.
I don't know. For me, when I look at this season, Brody's the heir to the throne after a number of years of finishing well at NXN. This course shouldn't have any surprises for him. He's run there well enough. The conditions very similar to what we've seen with the cold and the rain. And for him not to be able to get the win, when you look back at his season, I think there's definitely some emotional highs with the team competing at NXR, which was a great result for them just to be there after everything they went through. But when I look at his whole season now, it ends, I don't want to say a flop, that's a little too extreme, but definitely not what he hoped. I don't think it's a great season for Brody to end in the way it does, because the expectation was to win a national title, not just to podium again. He'd been there, he'd done that, and really the win is what's going to determine whether or not this was a really strong season for him, especially not being able to compete at Foot Locker Nationals and not having that. I think that's tough. That's an asterisk on his running in 2017 through cross country. Not a great result because he wasn't given many opportunities to race. Brian, Brody Hasty's season, success, yes or no?
I still think I'm agreeing with Corey on this. It's definitely a success. He had one heck of a race. He's running national caliber talented guys here. And just because he podiumed last year doesn't mean he's a shoo-in for next year's podium. This is the best of the best. Like, it's not some schlub off race. Like, and I think, you're saying, okay, he ran college races all season. He only ran a couple races. He really put himself in the mix to use a strategic kind of race. I still think, if you look at where some of those other guys were in his area of the country and who he maybe would have raced throughout the season, he blew them all out of the water anyways. He still would have done the same thing against high school competition. These guys were guys from other parts of the country he hadn't seen before, and he probably wasn't going to get to see until this national championship meet. So for Brody to finish second, I still think it's a huge, huge race. And, hats off to Aiden Troutner. Like, that's an impressive performance. He closed the gap so well at the end. And then another guy, I know we're talking about Brody, but Liam Anderson had a huge close as well. those guys, like, it's the unexpected of a national championship that you just don't see in other races. I don't think it's a slight at all on Brody for how he finished.
I believe he ran like the 8th fastest time across both the courses. So you look at what he was able to do on that day. I think that is a success. I mean, if your barometer for a great season is just winning a national championship, sure, it was on.
It's only one person
it
gets
was
that.
one of his goals, but I mean, you didn't accomplish it. Doesn't mean that your season was a failure because of that. You were 200 meters away from winning a national title. You were
less than a second or two.
I mean, you're right there. Yeah. So.
A win's a win. A win, the loss column is what it is. But, Brian, the master of segue, is already getting into our next topic here, and that is the most impressive performances at NXN this season. What surprised us? One thing that stood out to me is I love that boys race on the individual side. No one came in afraid of Brody. We very easily could have seen this race turn into that lead pack just sitting on Brody, letting him dictate the pace. Let's wait to see what he does. He's the heir to the throne, but instead, just constant attacks throughout the entire race, coming off the back hills, Danny Kilray really throwing it down, James Morrow taking over towards the end. It was a thrilling individual battle. I love the guts from all those guys in that lead pack, at least throwing it out there and putting their shot. So for you guys watching this, we want to know most impressive performance for you. Let's talk about the boys first. What stood out the most?
I would say, so things for me, I wrote that article yesterday. Obviously FM Boys was big. Liam Anderson, the California squads were pretty big things, all those things in the article. But one thing that I didn't mention, the Keller girls had an outstanding race to finish 4th. For the South Region teams, that's huge. I got some notes here. The South Lake Carroll squad back in 2011, I think it was on the girls' side, finished 2nd. In 2012, the boys finished 2nd as well. Maybe I had that switched. But those two teams, that was the last time a South Region team was even that close to podium or being on the podium. So for Keller and the South Region, I think that was a big performance by those ladies there on Saturday.
A close second for me, I just want to mention Bozeman. I had them possibly finishing top 3, and they ultimately finished 5th. But their top runner, Camilla No, was clipped at the line from the start, so that hampered her race. They still finished 5th, so I think that's a close second. But for me, it's got to be the Southwest, both on the boys and the girls side. I'll stick with, I think Timp ran a really great race and Desert Vista ran a really great race. But on the girls side, 3 Colorado teams in the top 10. And Battle Mountain, number 3 overall in the nation. They came in, weren't expected to win NXR Southwest, but they did, beating a strong Mountain Vista team. They come here to NXN and really just, the lights went out basically with that performance. Like, they had a phenomenal showing, and I think Battle Mountain really came to play, and it showed the strength of Southwest overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Battle Mountain, just the way their season ended was incredible. So for you guys, putting you on the spot here, is look at that girls' team podium. You have Fayetteville-Manlius, who certainly the overwhelming favorites, having to race through sickness. Naperville North, almost the smallest margin of victory FM's ever had with that incredible 2nd place podium. Battle Mountain, not really on people's radar for the podium spot. So when you look at those 3, each of you right now pick which was the most impressive podium race on the girls' team side.
Go ahead.
You got it.
I mean, I like Naperville. Naperville North was lost on most people's radars after GRIAC. People kind of forgot about Naperville North, even though they were highly ranked, but they didn't race any really big meets after September. So they came into this championship really a little undervalued, I think, but they came to play in these tough conditions. Illinois teams don't always battle the adverse, terrain and conditions, but they really came to play, and they had a phenomenal race from front to back. Their 5th girl in particular, Megan Driscoll, I think she went from about 150 in the first mile to 107. She ultimately finished in 5th place for that team, and I think she scored in the 50s. So she had a phenomenal race, and I think that's what led them to such a tight outing there against Fayetteville-Manlius.
I have to agree with Corey on that, but also, like you said, no testament, or FM has the talent there. You just see how they pull together, and I think, coming from a team, running in college, to have that bond and that strength in your runners and in your athletes, and to know and rely on each other like they did when 2 of their top girls, weren't feeling so great. That's a huge testament to what they did, and even Bill Ayers said, that's one of the closest. When they got up on the podium, they honestly did not know if they were 1st or 2nd, because there's other years where they've been like, okay, we comfortably got the win. This year they just didn't know, and for them, even though they are one of the best around, it just proves during sickness and in health they are the strongest in the country.
Yeah, that was a clutch performance out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, when I looked at this, certainly Battle Mountain. But on the boys' side, I had to pick two teams, and they finished right next to each other, too. That was Desert Vista and CBA is the most impressive performances in my mind, outside the individual winners, because you had two teams who were really off of the radar. Desert Vista, you had a lot of questions right after the race. Does this justify the committee's pick? I say no. Absolutely not, because the committee did not make it clear as to why they're choosing this team. The process was super convoluted, so I don't think Desert Vista's performance justifies the committee's decision, but I think that it proves the doubters wrong. It proves that this was a strong team and that they ran well when it mattered the most, and that was at NXN, so definitely on there. Same thing with CBA. Outside of Manhattan, the rest of their season did not go as well as we had thought it might. They weren't winning by big margins. It didn't look like this was one of the stronger CBA teams, but they bounced back, top 10 finish. So shout out to both Desert Vista and CBA for outperforming the expectations of both of those programs for top 10 finishes coming in. So that was what we took away from this year. We're going to look ahead to 2018 NXN because it's never too early to start making some predictions. So we're making predictions right now. I think Naperville North, you guys are talking about them as most impressive this year. They returned 5 girls. Naperville North is finally going to end the FM streak. FM a little more senior heavy than previous years. They're not reloading as much. Naperville North returns 5 girls from the second place team. Naperville North is going to be on top of the podium next year. Naperville North girls taking the win. Brian, Corey. Brian, you first hit me. What are your way too early picks for NXN 2018?
Way too early. I got boys individual. I got Alex Mayer. He was my favorite this year. I still think he's an amazing runner. He ended up finishing 14th. I think maybe even though he wasn't still sick, that some of just the mentalness of it, there's a lot of mental aspects to racing, was still affecting him, knowing that he had that sickness later or early in the season. I think Alex Mayer is still one of the best runners and athletes in the country, and I think next year he's going to make a real big impact, especially if there's no injuries, illnesses. And then girls side, obviously Caitlin Toohey. She runs NXN again. It's a lock. And then Corey, you got individuals, or do you want me to go with my team still?
Should I go individuals, Travis?
Wishy-washy over here. Teams, let's go, Corey.
Teams, I'm going to go with Burnt Hill boys. They were third out of New York, and they didn't qualify as an at-large to NXN. But you look at their team, just one of those guys has graduated. They have a lot of motivation, getting kind of scorned by the committee. So I think Burnt Hills really has incentive to come back and really do well.
There's actually a Burnt Hills was robbed Instagram account that was created. I don't know what they intend to accomplish with it, but I think they're going to agree with you, Corey.
Yeah,
I like what Corey says there, but I think they're going to go through FM too, because if you look at their squad, they bring back all but one on the boys' side, and I think they were a little underrated as well, Travis, as far as like surprises. They had one heck of a race too.
Yeah, we always talk about the girls' team peaking at the right time. FM boys have been there, but not necessarily known for podium finishes. That's really strong by them. As we look ahead to next year, let us know what your thoughts are. Hit us up, MileSplit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. What are your way too early picks for next year? We had a lot of people sending predictions, but we definitely want to hear. But first, Corey has one more thing he wants to jump in here looking ahead.
Can I just give a shout out to my early prediction? I think Conan Smith out of Middletown in Ohio is a guy to really, really watch. He was the lost child, basically, out of Ohio. We had the trio of guys we were talking about all year long, and then he came out of nowhere. D1 meet in Ohio, finished barely a second behind Dustin Horder for that championship. He finished 8th here at NXN, and I interviewed him pre-race on Thursday alongside Dustin Horder, and he rarely spoke. He didn't really know what to say because he hasn't really been interviewed, but, he's soaking in everything this year. As a junior, he looked at Dustin Horder. He saw how Dustin Horder sort of managed himself through media, through performances and everything, and I think he's going to learn from that year, one of the best guys in Ohio, and I think Conan Smith's going to be a really talented guy to watch out for next year.
Dustin Horder's a good role model to have as well.
Absolutely. A lot of love from the Horder family, but that's enough about NXN. We still got more racing action coming up for you. This weekend, we have Foot Locker Nationals. A lot to talk about here at Foot Locker, and it really starts with Claudia Lane. With her, she comes in as the heavy favorite. So, guys, the big question is, does Claudia Lane have challengers? Is she going to run away like Caitlin Toohey? For her, the question is Toohey, Claudia Lane. What does Claudia need to do to prove she is at least as good as Toohey at Foot Locker?
I think we spoke about it earlier with speed ratings. You know, they're really a measuring stick. They're like a seed time, but to balance out that performance by Caitlin too, I think Claudia Lane has to really run in the 16:30 ranges at Balboa Park to really equal that performance. You know, because Caitlin Tui just blew away the field, and there's not a lot you can do considering she's a sophomore, considering she's underclassman. Claudia Lane, I mean, it seems like she's been sort of undervalued too, but I think she's just as good, and I think she has a really great performance left in her for Foot Locker Nationals.
Right, Brian, my question for you here, as we look at the individuals, Tui, I think behind Lane and Tui, these fields are fairly similar. We have some talented athletes. We can certainly talk about depth, but in terms of the next 5 to 10 athletes behind Tui at NXN and 5 to 10 athletes behind Claudia Lane, they're pretty similar. Tui won by about 45 seconds. If we see an athlete like Rebecca Story within 10 to 15 seconds of Lane at Foot Locker, do you think that we then are going to value Tui's performance better? What kind of gap do you think Lane has to establish here for us to see her and Tui on the same level this season?
I mean, I think she's got to establish quite a large gap, but I think that's not. I think that'll come with just her racing style and the course. And you know, I watched her post-race interview after Foot Locker West, and she's like, I just love to run. Like, she's just like, you know, there's like no doubt, there's no pressure. She just goes out there and really enjoys what she's doing. So, and I think that's a huge, huge positive to have on her side. And I know a lot of athletes love what they do in running, but like, you know, she genuinely is just like always happy and smiling anytime I've talked to her. And I think that's going to help her to just generate and continue to go. And I think it's just so hard to compare the two athletes until we get to see them run together. And I know that's obviously not going to happen this year from the looks of things, but it's just Claudia Lane will have to have one heck of a race, I think, to match Tui. And I think she'll be able to do it, though.
I guarantee she's going to gap the field by at least 30 seconds. I guarantee it. And Olivia Theis at Lansing Catholic in Michigan is probably the next best runner. She's also a senior. Tui was racing against Colbreth and Hart, who were both sophomores. She was largely running against younger talent. Theis is older. Rebecca Story is a Stanford recruit. You know, Marley Starling is a sophomore, but there's a lot more experience on the line here for Foot Locker Nationals. These girls have been here before, so I think you have to take that into account as well.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. To me, I still need a dominant race from her. Claudia Lane has crushed California all season in the same way that Tui crushed out in New York. But for her, I think she does have to come out and make her presence felt. It's not like last year. I think it helped her to have Nevada to be able to help push her at a national meet for the first time. She's coming back now. Rebecca Story is very good. She's certainly improved from her third place finish last year. Is Rebecca where Nevada was at this time? I don't quite think so. But for her, if that gap is pretty tight, you know, for Lane, I need to see her really come out and take control and just dominate this field to look at her in the same light as Tui and on Tui's level. But Brian, as we look at the potential athletes to challenge, who do you look at on the girls' side as some girls who are in the contention for a podium this weekend at Foot Locker?
Well, I think, like you said, Rebecca Story has got to be one of the biggest after finishing third last year. You'd think that she'd come back with experience, knowing the course has a huge play and impact on that. It can really help her to run the way that she wants to run and possibly make it to that podium finish again.
And for you, Brian, you've been, you know, master of the individual rankings on the boys' side all season. It's a really interesting race because you have guys coming in fresh, you have guys coming in off NXN. We don't have Brody, we don't have Aiden Troutner. When you look at this race at Foot Locker Nationals, who are the boys you are looking at who have a legitimate chance to actually win this race?
Well, one of my favorites, I think, is Danny Kilray. I think he's been crushing it all season. We saw him up there at NXN. He was fifth, I believe, in the finals. But, you know, he took it out hard. He took it out from the gun. The Midwest guys, one of the big impressive performances that we saw this weekend, were amazing at NXN. I think Danny Kilray is going to carry that over into Foot Locker. I know he's raced a lot this season, but I think he's one of those workhorses that can continue to push hard here. And then I got a sleeper pick. I got Nathan Lawler from New York. He's had quite a solid season. I think he's going to have a breakout race here at Foot Locker.
Yeah, absolutely. Mason Gatewood, he just barely squeaked in from St. Anthony's 10th at Foot Locker Northeast. I saw him as a guy who was maybe coming on strong as more of a cross runner. We'll have to see if he can bounce back. That definitely was not a great race. It's great to qualify, but he's someone who's looking at maybe a podium shot after that. I don't know if I see him as a contender anymore. Midwest really proved they were legit at Nike Cross Nationals. There's no doubt of that. They won in the terms of best individuals, all 5 All-Americans. So I'm going with the Midwest still, and Zach Kreft. Kilray looked really strong. I think Kreft is coming in fresh. He had a phenomenal race, both at just off the case at NXN, but he qualified for Foot Locker Midwest. I think he's coming in rested. Zach Kreff, my pick out here to win on the boys' side. Corey, looking at potential podium contenders on the girls' side, winners on the boys. Who you're going with this weekend?
I think Olivia Theis, as I mentioned, is the second best runner in the girls' field, so I have confidence she's going to finish second here at Foot Locker Nationals. I think just the tier below her is Marley Starling of Northern, the superb sophomore out of Northern High in Pennsylvania. She is a phenom in waiting. I guarantee she's going to be great in this run, and she's going to have a good finish. Rebecca Story, for me, also very good. She had a great 3,200 on the track recently, and she's going to finish well because she's experienced. So I look at those three outside of Claudia Lane. And then on the boys' side, I'm taking a sleeper in Clayton Mendez from Illinois. He's got great track speed, but he finished in the top 10 at NXN. He was third at NXR Midwest. I think he's a guy who could really take it. This field is wide open. Last year, Reed Brown won it. He was sixth at NXN. So I think any guy, if they race the smart way, I think they win it. You really have to attack the downhills at Balboa Park, and I think if they do that, it could be anybody's game.
Yeah, it sounds like all of us have a Midwest pick here. I was going to say, sounds like this Midwest region is a fairly stronger region here.
Yeah, it's a lot of faith in the Midwest, a lot of faith, I think, in those NXN performances. The boys' Foot Locker races just haven't quite been what we hoped they could have been the past couple of years in terms of depth of talent. When we look at this year, Brody gets upset. Troutner takes the win, so Troutner currently is your national champion. When we look at Foot Locker, what needs to happen for us to view someone as one step above Troutner versus Troutner being the true champion here?
Well, it's interesting. Bill Tully who rates speed ratings, he said generally Balboa Park performances actually get higher speed ratings based on difficulty of the course. So we might have performance out of Foot Locker Nationals that has a better rating than NXN. But what needs to happen? I think somebody has to blow us away.
Yeah.
They really have to sort of, have a unbelievable performance, much like Caitlin Toohey, because we don't expect a lot out of the boys' race. So I think we need to be surprised in some way. Definitely, somebody needs to break 15 minutes to really, grab us.
Yeah, I think they have to have a breakout race because we saw the athletes, the podium really at NXN, those top guys, most of which are not going to be. We're not seeing Morar, we're not seeing Hasty, we're not seeing Troutner. So if you win Foot Locker, if you want to be talked about in the same way as those guys, then you really have to do something that separates yourself, especially if you're a guy who did not win at NXN and you come back and win this race. And if it's a close finish, then that's incredible. You won Foot Locker Nationals, but are we going to view them as a step above Troutner and Hasty? I don't really think so. But as we look ahead to this week, for those of you following all the phenomenal coverage from NXN by Brian and Corey, you may have saw they had some trivia games. You can win some MileSplit gear. Guys, do we have anything else in the works at Foot Locker we got to be looking out for?
Yeah, we're hoping to do the same thing at Foot Locker. We got some MileSplit hats to give away. So if you're watching and you see us walking around at Foot Locker there, we might have the camera be ready to do some trivia. So
that's right.
Follow up, start to learn your facts about Foot Locker.
That's right. You better be locked into milesplit.com for all those history, all the stats and everything coming out this week, so you can be ready for that trivia. Corey, what do you got going on?
Oh yeah, no, I'll just book it off of that. It's funny, at NXN we asked 4 questions and all 4 questions were answered correctly. So we probably have to ask them more difficult questions.
Got to up the ante, I think. More precise about what exact times and what exact years and what exact. And no helping this time, because Corey let somebody help, and that just that went awry.
Yeah, we're doing too good of a job at educating the people on MileSplit here in terms of the stats and times and all that. But guys, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to follow MileSplit. They're going to be down there in San Diego enjoying some nice weather at the end of this cross-country season. Tons of post-race interviews and everything else. Brian, Corey, thanks for joining in today.
See you back in the studio next week.
Later.
All right, so that wraps it for our cross-country discussion. Trent, you actually rolled a Twitter poll today. How about you filling the fans on what went down there?
Yeah, on Twitter earlier today we asked what was the most impressive thing from NXN. Was it Loudon Valley scoring 89? Was it Caitlin Toohey's course record at 16:44? Aiden Trouter's upset of Brody Hasty, or FM's 11 team titles? Twitter said Caitlin Toohey's course record. I would like to say Loudon Valley scored 89 because there's more variables with that. 5 scores there. Travis, what do you think?
That's a tough one. Troutner's upset certainly was maybe the most shocking out of all of those. but Tui's course record solo is unbelievable. That's enough about cross country. For those of you who missed it, track is back, and I've never been more fired up in my entire life. We had so much happening in the past weekend. We've got live events coming up. We have to do a quick roundup of everything that happened. First, this clip that's going viral on the internet is absolutely incredible. This poor girl, she gets tripped, falls down, coming up from behind, and boom, she gets kicked in the head. Just the audio, and if you listen to it closely, you can hear the sound of that foot making contact with her head. It's absolutely brutal. I can't believe that she survived, but she did. She followed up, said she's all right, and she made it, but track's back. We love it. And we had even crazier stuff going on. We had this sent to us from the Crossplex.
We can get the girls running the hurdles. You can make...
Just throw my goggles around, Mike.
We don't know what's going on. We got people getting taken out. We got people wearing goggles at cross-country meets, but track is back. Never been more excited. Keep sending us everything you've got going on. And we have the first kick of the week from the Virginia Real Deal High School Classic. Big kick finish in that 3200.
It's coming down to the line. Way too close to call.
Real tight finish there between those top two athletes, but we are back from Virginia this weekend. One of the sleeper things to keep an eye on is all these top performances out of North Carolina. We had a really fast athlete moving up out of the 500. Really strong performance out of McCabe in the 500. He ran a 105 in that race, which is really strong, with some video footage here from Real Deal.
Durham. He is coming. This is a quick time. 105.
And to put some perspective behind that 105, that would be right around the top 25 in the entire season last year, so that's really strong. Only a handful of guys return under 105, and so for him to post that in the first meet of the year, that's really strong. So you got to watch out for these indoor times. And we have two meets live on MileSplit.com this weekend. We have Gloucester and we have Holiday Invite down in the Crossplex in Alabama. We have plenty of teams and really top talented sprinters, but Gloucester, guess who's back? Loudoun Valley. They just won NXN, but they're racing live on MileSplit.com this weekend. They're no stranger to these types of things. Last year, they put out plenty of top races.
Opening 200 in this 8-lap race.
You can see those guys getting started there in the 1600, getting in some track fast times coming off of that peak performance at NXN is pretty common. You'll see all them coming back. They're running the 1K, the 2 mile, and the 1600 on MileSplit, Friday, Saturday, 2 days of live track. But same thing down in the Holiday Invite in Gloucester. Right now, Jasmine Griffith, she is the #1 time in the 60-meter dash. You see her running that performance this last week in Alabama. She's currently leading the country. It's not a mind-blowing time, but that 7.63 currently U.S. #1 as she dominates the opening heat here last weekend. And she has the first big matchup now coming up against some other Alabama athletes in the 60, and she has to fight to keep that back now because that's going to start being challenged as the season gets underway. So you got to be dialed in on there. There's a big matchup coming in the 60 with Jasmine Griffith trying to defend herself against other Alabama State champions in other divisions. So you have those two events, Real Deal. Excuse me, you have Gloucester in Virginia. So much track I can't even keep track of it. You have Gloucester Invite in Virginia Friday and Saturday. Holiday Invite Alabama Friday and Saturday. That's 2 meets, 2 days long, plenty of Foot Locker coverage. It's going to be a wild weekend. Make sure you stay dialed on MileSplit.com. We have tons of more coverage coming your way to kick off the indoor track season. And for the first time ever, we're giving you a little tease because next week we are debuting something that is big. High school track and field has never seen this before. I'm not going to give you the details because we're going to tease you out here, but it's something that's really going to change the game in indoor track. We do the same thing in outdoor. But next week, December 11th, we're going to debut it for the first time. We're really excited about what we're doing here. So all of you have to stay dialed in Monday morning, milesplit.com. You have to be locked on to see what's about to drop. It's going to blow your mind. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on MileSplit Live today. We'll catch you next week.